Get your hands on stylish t-shirts, hoodies, and more at wearbuff.com. That's wearbuff.com. And make sure to use the promo code TWB at checkout for 20% off your first order. Stay Buffalo proud with Wear Buff. The Buffalo Bills dropped their second game in a row to the Houston Texans, losing by a score of 23-20. What does that mean for the rest of the season? This week on the Wandering Buffalo podcast.
You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your host, Justin Goddard.
Bills Mafia, welcome in and thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo FamBase podcast network. My name is Justin. I'll be your host today, and welcome back. Thank you for joining me. Apologies for missing a week in there, this week being a little bit late. As you can see, if you are a fan of the show, a little bit in a different setting here. My wife and I did buy a new house. The setup is still a work in progress. It's honestly barely started, but among getting the rest of the house in order, some issues that have come up, being a first-time homeowner, just some stuff we're working through. But I did want to get an episode out for you all this week, so give me some grace as I get the setup in order here, and timing might be a little bit screwy in the weeks coming forward, but should be getting back on track here. So being that this show is coming out a little bit later than usual, kind of want to take a little bit of a different approach to this week's show. I'm recording here on a Wednesday. If you consume Bills content, there's not much I'm going to tell you about this game that you can't find or haven't already found about this past game against Houston. So I just kind of want to take a look at where the team stands right now. 2 losses in a row. This one in particular looking pretty ugly. Really paltry offense, and we're seeing all of the reactions out there, from fire McDermott to trade for Davante Adams and pretty much everything in between. So in particular, I do want to talk about the wide receiver room this week, and just kind of where it stands and what I'd like to see the Bills do, if anything, all that. So for starters, I want to touch on this idea of everybody eats, because it worked out great. It was super fun the first few weeks, and then the last 2 weeks, not so much. And I want to say in particular for this game, receivers were not good. And obviously we did not have Khalil Shakir this week. And kind of just makes me feel, and having this in our memory, that the plan was to have something resembling this receiver group with Stefon Diggs, right? So this room itself wasn't exactly their plan. I've seen a lot of people out there talking about, like, this is what they chose to do. I think that this was their plan in the offseason, but with Diggs, and they kind of were having conversations with Diggs about, like, hey, we're going to cut into your target share a little bit, but it's going to be for, the better of the whole team. Obviously, not in the room for these conversations or anything. But I think it got to a point where they're trying to make that happen, and they weren't getting Diggs on board, and the situation became untenable, and they had to pivot. They didn't want to get rid of their elite number 1 receiver. They didn't want to eat $30 million of cap just to create a hole. So then, you kind of brand it as everybody eats. We're going to, this is going to sound good to the fans. They're going to get excited. But what I feel like we really saw this past Sunday is that, and say everybody eats, but what it looked like without Khalil Shakir out there tells me that you do still have a true number one. It's Khalil Shakir instead of Diggs. Is what it is. So then we kind of see, what the aftermath of it. Davante Adams wants out of Vegas, and could the Bills trade for Davante Adams? Some other names floated around out there, and I would just kind of be cautious about that. I feel like there could be a coming move at wide receiver, but I don't think it's going to be a move for a guy like Davante Adams. I think that where this organization is right now, the situations that they were forced to deal with Diggs, it's very much from the rest of the roster perspective, a year that they were consciously getting younger and cheaper and kind of rebooting for this second era of Josh Allen. And, still having a roster that remained competitive throughout it. And taking that a step further, what do coaches, what do GMs try to do to make sure they have a job year over year? They got to be selling tickets, want to get into the playoffs, keep the fans engaged to have a chance. And when you look at the current landscape of the AFC East, even with the struggles the Bills are having at this time, is it unreasonable to think that they still win the division? I mean, I had Miami as our biggest competition for the division. They have Tua out for at least a couple more games. Even when Tua was in there, it seems like the NFL kind of is a little bit more privy to what they want to do offensively, and they just didn't look like the same team from last year. And even with that, the team from last year, kind of fell apart down the stretch. You look at some of the players, they let Christian Wilkins walk and use the money that I would have given to Christian Wilkins to keep around Jalen Ramsey, an aging cornerback. Not loving some of the decisions there. We have the Jets, who, media darling, picked to win the Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers coming back. Well, they haven't looked great, and they just got done firing their head coach. I do wish the timing of that was different, because I think that that one game interim head coach boost is a very real thing in the NFL. And it seems to happen pretty frequently the week before teams play the Bills. Whatever is what it is. But am I counting on the Jets being the team that knocks us off our throne? Really hard to say that 5 weeks into the season, and then you have New England. They have just announced that they're making the decision to start Drake May starting this week, and maybe he comes in and lights the NFL up and is a rookie sensation, and it's a different team. I just don't see it. Playing, Jacoby Brissett was just standing back there getting beat up. They still leave a lot to be desired in the skill positions. And it's a rookie quarterback coming into a team that's been pretty bad for pretty long. So I don't count on New England making any kind of noise there. So do I look at this as a situation where the Bills made the choice to move on from Diggs and eat the money and get younger across the roster, only to 5 weeks into the season start spending the money, force in a guy like Davante Adams, who I believe is 32. He's on the other side of 30, and basically just do a 1-for-1 swap with Adams and do it again. I see this more as, if there is for an upgrade in this room, it's MVS. It's one of these tail end of the roster guys that you're not getting much out of. And I think MVS is the pretty obvious one here. kind of a one-trick pony. He can run straight down the field, but we see this high leverage situation in this past game where he's running like a hitch route against Derek Stingley, and he's just not going to win those reps very often. That's not even including any of his drop issues. The name that I get myself more excited for, I still don't think is very likely, is Amari Cooper. I think you can do that with lots of trade compensation. From reports, the Raiders are looking for a 2 for Davante Adams. So, I mean, even going more 1-for-1 swap for Diggs, you're going to take the compensation you got for Diggs to just give it away. I think you can get Amari Cooper done for some mid-round picks, maybe a 4th, maybe a combination of a 4 and a 5, something like that. And his salary is much more easy to work in with a cap strap Bills team. The Browns are also a dumpster fire. Sean Watson, I don't know how they decided to just restructure that contract because he does not look like an NFL player anymore. That's more of the path that I could see happening. I think Davante Adams is kind of a pipe dream, and I'm not even sure that we should want that. I don't know. I just myself too excited for a move like that. I think the most likely option, and a lot of you listening to the show aren't going to like this, is that they maintain status quo. And I think the big reason for that is you're looking at we had to play this game without Shakir. He's been great going back to last season and into this season. And the big thing I think people are forgetting about is Curtis Samuel. And with that kind of just the newness of this offense, and in our heads, maybe we're ruined by Madden, but we put this roster together and we expect everything to just, I drop back to pass and I throw it to him and he's where I expect him to be because that's what's supposed to happen. The only wide receiver returning that has caught passes from Allen before is Shakir, and that's a very small sample size. So kind of getting all these people on the same page, getting things to gel, it might just take time. And I could see this organization kind of having it in their heads that we planned on this taking some time. There was going to be some hiccups along the way with getting a younger roster and doing this reset. And if we look towards 2025, we actually have cap space to spend. We have a bevy of draft picks to work with. If they think that they can snip the playoffs with this roster, and this is kind of a hitch in the road, I don't see them being willing to move a lot of draft capital to kind of get anything done. I've been wrong a ton in the past. I could probably be wrong again right now. There's smarter football minds in play here. We'll see what happens. Which kind of brings me into, talked a little bit about coaches and GMs and what their goal is, outside of winning a Super Bowl. Obviously, that's everybody's goal. But kind of like a step down from that is they're trying to keep their jobs. Year over year, they're trying to make sure that they have their paycheck coming in and what that looks like. And this kind of brings me into a lot of a talking point I've seen a ton this week about it's time for McDermott to go. And I'm going to start right off the top by saying I don't see it as being very realistic, and particularly not 5 weeks into the season. This is a coach that's had a ton of success here. You look at an owner who's had a hell of a time finding head coaches that have worked out. And of all the coaching blunders that we've seen, the one this week is kind of a blip on my radar compared to the other ones. When you think about 13 seconds and whatever, Hail Murray, there's so many of these. Denver game last year. I think that's my biggest case for maybe he should go, is that there are so many to point to. But also, like, if they haven't cost him his job yet, what makes you think that 5 weeks into the season that they're going to do it now? I just don't see it. And for this week in particular, the situation at the end of the game is a tough one for me, because I'm seeing such, blanket statements of what should have been done and what was done wrong. And I get it. Like, you're starting with the ball at your own 3-yard line. You got less than a minute left. You got no timeouts, and you throw it 3 times from your end zone. Not only are you throwing it, they're, pass play stretching the field. And would that sequence be different for me? Absolutely. Like, I'm running on first down there, see if I get anything out of it. If I do, Houston's now used one of their timeouts. Second down, maybe we hit a play action. Depending on the success there, maybe completed it, but it's not a first down, incomplete pass, whatever. Then I'm running on third down. We've used some clock. We've used some other timeouts. And, from that point, kind of playing for overtime. But what I struggle with in this situation of, how wrong this sequence is, how inexcusable this sequence is kind of playing it with the benefit of playing the results, right? And how many times have we been in a tight situation and we go conservative and we run the ball and we try to take it to overtime, and the other team scores on the first possession of overtime and you lost the game. And now it's, how could we possibly, play for overtime when we have Josh Allen? You got to put the ball in his hands. And I do think the situation here matters of how backed up you are in your own end zone, and, these plays being long developing plays. But the play call is what it is. And it's not like they were running 4 verticals and everybody's going down the field. At a certain point, it does have to be on Josh Allen to understand, like, the situation of, hey, at the very least, let's get a first down. Let's see what happens. If we get a first down, we can leave them with no time on the clock and go from there. These down the field options, we're never in the headset. We won't ultimately know, if Joe Brady, if Sean McDermott is telling Allen, like, hey, let's make sure we make the smart choice with the ball here. Let's just try to get completions, get them to use their timeout, try to get a first down. So this one, at the end of the day, like, yes, everything comes back to the head coach. It all falls on his shoulders of what happens with this team. But to be 5 weeks into the season and we're already, firing up the fire Sean McDermott train, I just can't get there. And that's with the caveat of, like, assuming you're just going to get somebody better. And whenever this conversation comes up, and I have had my moments where I wanted McDermott to go, but the first place I have to go to with this is, okay, you want McDermott gone, who are you replacing him with? And I saw this week, what if Dayball gets fired? Would you bring him in as a head coach and fire McDermott? Are you calling Bill Belichick? No. Bill Belichick accomplished very little in the league before Tom Brady and very little in the league after Tom Brady, to the point where he gets fired from New England and he's doing broadcasts right now. Like, he didn't get all kinds of offers just because he was available last season. And now you're going to be another year removed from that, 6 months, whatever. I think both situations between the coach and the wide receiver room, I think there's spots that it's worth keeping an eye on right now and seeing how it progresses. one of the biggest things that I see for this wide receiver room right now, my argument against making a move is you kind of already have that move on your roster, and it's Curtis Samuel, and banking on Keon Coleman continuing to develop and getting Shakir back healthy. Now, will I make an argument for rounding out some depth? Absolutely. Can I make the argument that you could add a number one and bump all these guys down a spot? Absolutely. But I think Samuel and he and Allen just haven't been quite on the same page yet. Joe Brady hasn't quite figured out how he wants to use Curtis Samuel yet. And again, there's a ton of newness in this offense, and we're only 5 weeks in. The first 3 weeks, we were all riding a high, like, holy shit, this strategy is working. Bills are geniuses, blah, blah, blah. And then we have just 2 brutal weeks, and the opponent here does matter to me. Baltimore, one of the better teams in the league. They're going through, some turnover themselves. But if I asked you before the season started, you're going to have Baltimore picked as a playoff team. If I asked you before the season started, you're going to have Houston picked as a playoff team. So, granted, if you're going to be a playoff team, if you're going to make some noise, you do have to beat those teams. Don't get me wrong. But it's early in the season. Some of these lulls with the Bills over the years where they're kind of figuring things out. And then last year, we were sitting like 6-6, looking at, are we even going to make the playoffs this year? And, they rattle off, they stack wins to end the season, and that's how it ends up. So I'm not quite hitting the panic button yet. I do have concerns about this offense right now. Especially with Houston, I think kind of put a blueprint out there on what to do against the Bills. And they were running a lot of single high safety and, closing off the middle of the field where the Bills like to win with Shakir, with Kincaid. And in a game where we didn't have Shakir, that's even more closed off. And they dared us to beat them on the boundaries, and we couldn't do it. Something to be mindful of going forward. I think that would be my biggest argument for bringing in a different receiver is just our inability to win on the boundaries over the last couple of weeks. But you got to give it some time here, see how it all comes together. And we do have an extra week for the trade deadline this week, so maybe we can see how it's playing out for a couple of weeks before we make a move. Kind of a lot to be mindful of, but we're 5 weeks in. Ship's not going down yet. We'll see what happens. A lot of football left to be played. If you did make it this far, I do ask that you like, share, subscribe, tell a friend about the show if you're enjoying it. If you made it this far and you hate the show, I'm sorry. But check out the rest of the shows on Buffalo FamBase. You came here because you like Bills football. Got a ton of different shows on FamBase, so there's definitely something out there for you. Check out our website, wanderingbuff.com. We got articles going up. We got merch. Jake's doing a great job with the website. And we got a big division game coming up against the Jets on primetime game. Jets team that just fired their head coach. Big matchup that'll have big implications if the Jets end up being who, the media expects them to be. To me, it still feels like the Jets are being Jets, but we'll see what happens. That's why we play the games. But thank you again for tuning in. Schedule going forward, we're going to try to get back on track of our regular release dates. Still dealing with a lot of stuff from the move, so we're going to get things in where we can, but make sure you're subscribed. That way you're never missing an episode, and we'll be out every week again. Thank you again for joining me, and we will see you after the Jets game. Go Bills.